third half an hour on the trick trace to 14th of July start.
Okay. Okay. So Trish asked, what is a sticky end? So if this represents a DNA molecule, in other words, it's two strands held together by a hydrogen bond, then this represents a DNA molecule. When a restriction enzyme cuts a DNA molecule, the ones that you're working with, that you're talking about, they never cut it straight down. So they never cut through this strand, through the hydrogen bonds, through that strand. They always cut it through one strand, and then they separate the hydrogen bonds, and then they cut down through the other strand. So if this was cut by a restriction endonuclease or a restriction enzyme, it would cut down the first thing, it would cut the hydrogen bonds, and it would cut down the second strand. So now this has a sticky end. So it's just a single strand that has got unpaired bases on it. Okay, and therefore, if it came into contact, you can close it if you want. Sorry. Okay, so that is a sticky end, and this is also a sticky end because it's a single strand of DNA there that sticks out from the rest of the DNA molecule, and it's got a pair of unpaired a set of unpaired bases that are not bonded, and this sticky end is complementary to that sticky end, but we've broken them, and therefore if you cut this DNA with the same restriction endonuclease down, across, down, then you'd also get sticky ends. Because you cut it with the same restriction endonuclease, these sticky ends, lost something. Oh, there it is. These sticky ends are complementary to these sticky ends. So you could take a ligase enzyme and put those sticky ends together because they're complementary. A ligase enzyme would form hydrogen bonds. Now you've got recombinant DNA because it's DNA from two different organisms. Okay? Because it's DNA from that organism and DNA from that organism. But because it's DNA, it will work as one piece of DNA. Does that make sense?
Also, when they were doing the Human Genome Project, how do you know which sequence of bases is a gene and which is non-coding DNA?
And which is?
Non-coding.
They didn't know that. So that was stuff that they had to work out after they'd finished sequencing everything. So they sequenced everything, then they had to work out what is a gene, what is non-coding, and which of those genes does what thing.
And how do you do that?
They just keep on working on those. Mostly they work backwards. Or they work with, if this is a gene, what would be the protein they could get from it? And what does this protein do? Match that protein up to known proteins within other organisms. And they go, okay, this is what that protein does, therefore that's what the gene does. Okay.
But how do you know which section of this whole long DNA molecule?
They would look for probably stop codons.
Oh.
Admit, I don't know all that stuff. It's gone very quickly, and a lot of advances have been made in a very short period of time. I'm listening, William.
So then is genetic engineering going to be in the technical by next week?
Did I not stand there and go, you realize that genetic engineering is part of genetics?
I just wanted to make sure, that's what I asked.
What's the matter? Did you hope that during the period of time it took me to walk from there to here, it just magically didn't become genetics?
No, I was hoping you would have genetics and then
If it was called mechanical engineering, then it wouldn't be with genetics. But it's not. It's called genetic engineering, so it's with genetics.
So much. It's basically like a subsection.
And Matt, also,
part of the section is DNA. So, like, does it just need to know about DNA in general? Like, section?
DNA, RNA, protein synthesis, mutations. Okay, stop. Guys, stop crying. It's just so not befitting teenagers. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, right, we happy. So this, a purist wouldn't call a cladogram, they'd call it a phylogenetic tree. You never have to learn these things. You have to be able to interpret them. Even a cladogram. You would never have to learn this cladogram, but you would have to be able to interpret it. So I could ask you various questions about it. Like, what is the most closely related organism to a reptile? Is a bird, because it's got more features in common than mammals have with reptiles, or amphibians have with reptiles, etc. Okay, right. And you could say that they all had individuals that are extinct. Not saying that nothing did go extinct, but of all the groups, there are still cartilaginous fish today, there's still bony fish, etc. Now this particular phylogenetic tree, very similar, but look, there's the timeline. It's not an imaginary one, and it says 30 million years ago, and million years ago is abbreviated as MYA. It's one of the abbreviations you're allowed to use. And there's 30 million years ago, and there's today. Okay, and this is 65 million years ago. So if I say to you, what group of organisms evolved 65 million years ago? Then you would say meso something or the others. Because look, they evolved 65 million years ago. They haven't changed since then. Are they extinct or are they extant? They're extinct because their line doesn't continue up until today. Okay? Then I could say to you, when did it become extinct? And you would take a ruler and you would draw straight up here, and you would give a very, very close estimation. You would say in this particular case, 35 million years ago. But some of them, you're going to have to, it will go between, like this one, is going to go between 50 and 45 million years ago. And so it would be approximately, and you've got to be quite accurate with it, 48 million years ago. You realize it's not going to be 50 blah years ago, because it's on this side of 50. Does that make sense, guys?
Well, where would we start measuring from? Like, would we put the ruler by its nose?
The end of, no, the end of it. Do you see where the line stops?
So when the line starts, what does that
Where
indicate?
this is when it evolved. That's when it became extinct.
Okay. How was it get the picture? And I thought that was just an arrow pointing towards the picture.
Oh, where's the tail?
Okay, right, you happy? So if I said to you, what is the most closely related organism to an Odontocetes?
Well, then you can't
An Odontocetes? Mysticetes. And which two groups exist today? Odontocetes and Mysticetes.
Wait, so now this diagram is telling us that we all came from that cat.
Yes. Yes.
No.
Cats can breathe.
Isn't that a cat at the top?
Firstly, that's not a cat.
It's a dog.
Secondly, it didn't come from a cat. There was a common ancestor here, which evolved into groups, which evolved into groups, which evolved into groups. So you can say that it came from this common ancestor, but you can't say it evolved from the cats.
But who, what's the other one? Like not the first cat, the second cat. I know it's not a cat, but yeah.
No, it was Okay, moving on. Watch that YouTube video. Okay. Right. Very important. Evidence for evolution. Okay. Right. Going. So, what are the pieces of evidence for evolution? And there are about 8 different categories that you need to know about. The fossil record, and this is a revision of work covered in grade 10. So you know what fossils are, hey?
Yeah.
Right, and you know that there are different kinds of fossils. So there are fossils that actually became permeated with minerals, and those are that kind of fossil. You know about fossils in amber,
Yeah.
okay? And you know about trace fossils. So if your father or your mother, let's not be sexist here, poured concrete on the driveway and the dog walked over it, those footprints would be trace fossils. Okay, right, you happy with that? Okay, so fossils give a story of long ago, blah, 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 blah. Most organisms don't eat fossils, etc.
Wait, ma'am, what do you mean most organisms don't eat fossils?
Eat fossils. Because they are a very, very specific group of conditions that are needed for a fossil to form. So if those conditions don't all exist at that time, then if an organism dies, sorry, it's not going to form a fossil. But if all those conditions exist at the same time, then a fossil can form. Okay, right. So if a hyena came along and crunched all the bones left over from the end of a lion kill, that's not going to leave a fossil. Okay, right, I saw you rocking.
What is the difference between a fossil and a mummy?
A fossil and a?
Mummy. Like an Egyptian.
Oh, a mummy.
A mummy. Oh, no, quite different. So those mummies were actually impregnated with certain chemicals which made them not rot.
Yeah, but like you can get it, like technically not an Egyptian mummy, but one that was, I remember learning about somebody who was in
Mummified
ice.
in snow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
mummified in snow.
this one was mummified in
So is
ice.
that a mummy, not fossil?
It's called a fossil.
Does it depend on is the age? If it's like
I think
an old
it's
mummy?
I think it's to do with the fact that
What if it was,
that this is extinct. I don't know.
could it not be like maybe if it was deliberately done by a human, then it would be mummification?
No, I don't
No,
think so.
because that person who was
No.
in ice just died. They didn't
Did
like.
they say
Oh,
it was
the
mummified?
Iceman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember Iceman.
It's a mummy, not a.
No, there are people who did. Okay, so I have no idea. I don't think technically this is a fossil. They do call it a fossil, but it's actually, you know how fossils occur in amber, okay?
Did they get stuck in it?
Yes, and then more resin is secreted by the tree, and they just get totally embedded in the resin, and over time, then obviously they're dead, etc. Then the sap becomes hardened, and the fossil is known as amber. Okay, right. You happy that fossils are normally formed in sedimentary rock?
That's the reason why fossilization is exclusively when something happens. It's when the organism is like embedded in the rock. Whereas mummification is like different chemicals and things.
Ma'am, the wind is kind of destroying.
Yeah, I'll just close the door and we won't come through. No, I mean I'll lock the door.
You would do that,
Okay. Right, is everybody happy and understands that?
Yes.
William!
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Absolutely do not obsess about this. What you have to know, so I don't need you to know very much about fossil formation. I need you to understand about how fossils are evidence of evolution. So generally speaking, fossils are found in sedimentary rock. And you know that sedimentary rock is layered rock. Okay, so let's say, for example, here's some rock, and organism A dies and is covered by mud, which then forms rock over time, and then organism B dies, etc., etc., etc. Then in the top layers of rock, the organisms are not as old as the organisms in the bottom layers of rock. So the story goes, and remember you learned in grade 10, this is the principle of superposition. Okay, and the principle of superposition states that older beds are covered by younger beds. And bed here is not something you go home and sleep on, it means a layer of rock. So this rock, if these layers of rock have not been disturbed by movements of the earth, then this is older than that, which is older than that, which is older than that, etc., etc., and this would be the youngest. And therefore the fossils in this layer of rock are older than the fossils in that layer of rock. Okay? And therefore, if you take these fossils and you take fossils out of all of these layers of rock and you can compare them, you can see changes that have occurred in the structure of the organisms over time. Does that make sense?
Can you just say it again, please, ma'am?
Okay, so if you take organisms from this layer, and organisms from this layer, and organisms from this layer, you would be, because this doesn't happen quickly, this happens over hundreds and tens and thousands of years, you can see things that have evolved. So there will be a layer which has, for the first time, organisms have got 4 limbs. And that means at that time period, organisms evolved with 4 limbs. But in the previous time periods, they didn't have 4 limbs. So this is history. This is like a history book, where the first pages are history way back. And then you become more and more recent, and now it's history now. This is ancient history. This is more recent history. These are the changes that have happened over time during history. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So that's the principle of superposition. Okay, so these fossils are older than those, and those are older than those, and you can see the changes that have occurred over time. And this is what is called as relative dating. Relative dating doesn't mean you take your cousin out to dinner. Okay? Relative dating means using geological principle to place events in chronological order, and that means that this fossil is not as old as that, and that is not as old as that one. That is relative dating. And if you find organisms in this particular stratum of rock that are fossils, then you know they existed at the same time. Does that make sense? Because they're all in the same stratum. So if they died at the same time, they must have existed at the same time. Okay. And if you find something in this layer and you don't find it in that layer, then you know they became extinct at that time. So that's relative dating. You saying how old things are relative to other things. Okay. All right. And these links can even be used in geographically distant sediments, where if you've got a sediment that is the same age as a sediment over there, then you can make links between the organisms that are found in them. Right, an index fossil is a fossil of a group that only existed during a particular period of geological time and was used to date the rock in which it is found. So if they knew that trilobites, maybe not a good example because I don't know an example off the top of my head, only existed in, I don't know, 200,000 years ago, and you find some trilobites and you find other animals with them, then you know that those other animals are the same age. Okay. All right, go and work.
We're the only ones actually have
I beg
to
your pardon?
ranking us. We actually told us to come to school.
And no, I'm not saying that at all. Bye, Sash. Pardon? You okay? Okay, bye. Yes. Pardon, love, I can't hear you.
What does the really intelligence do?
Oh, studies fossils.
What if you can't find fossils to study?
You lose your job. You go and work for somebody who does find fossils. So Michelle, why are you saying we're the only ones who bother to come to school? Do you think that you get a lot of benefit from coming to school?
That's what
Yeah,
I'm
that's
saying.
actually means. Like, no one's doing
You
it.
should thank us.
No, I really appreciate it. No, I don't care. Because if you didn't come to school, I could go home. But
End of
it's much
last
better because you
half
can
an
ask
hour.
questions. I can watch your
Press half,
faces.
press
If
two,
you're
14
clueless,
July,
wander up and say,
end,
Barbara,
done.
wake up.